Analytics. This is the free consulting segment of our webinar, Open Access to Gurus Tony and Scott. And actually, Tony is presenting at a client site today, and so once he wrapped up his regular presentation, he had to return back to the classroom. So it'll be me and Scott. You'll be in great hands nonetheless, and we'll field it from two different perspectives. Mine is more from a project management, customer success point of view, and Scott, obviously highly seasoned as a direct practitioner in the field. So you'll have those two perspectives as we go through the questions. We are still a little bit lean, and for an hour-and-a-half webinar, which is kind of taboo, we typically enjoy great retention, and we have that today. So there is the chance to get more questions in for the remaining 15 minutes that we have for the reserved 90 minutes of the webinar. So let's start with the first question. Ibro asks, what is the industry standard time frame for operationalizing a developed model? I would begin to say that that can be highly variable. Are you looking to develop a model that's going to be operationalized for a single department? Are you looking across the enterprise initially? And that's what we recommend before going in to build a single model from an isolated point of view. It's almost like what we talk about with Abe Lincoln, where if he's given an hour to chop down a tree, he'll spend the first 40 minutes sharpening his axe. Well, that's what should be done with these projects. And you may have seen that with a lot of the strategic emphasis in the webinar, that the sharpening of the axe is to take the time to do a comprehensive assessment, to understand the resources, to understand the motivations of leadership, to understand how the results need to be translated, to be actionable, to understand the environment in which you're working so that there need not be retrofit. Does that slow down the development process? Yes. But when it's done, you can be far more agile. You'll have more of a factory to much more rapidly develop models that do hit the organizational targets and are operational and aren't just doing analytics for the sake of analytics. Having said that, a grad student can build a model in a matter of days with modern software, but that's just, as we showed on here, that's building the rocket without a mission plan. So it really varies on the breadth of what you want to achieve. Do you want to build a single model for a single objective? If it's done the right way, I would argue 6 weeks. I'm going to look to Scott to see what his experience is for a single model with a specific objective. The data is largely at the ready. Then I think a reasonable time frame is 6 weeks. Will some vendors tell you 2 weeks? Sure, but you should be suspect. If a vendor is going to turn a model around in 2 weeks, they may be cheating on some things. And in reality, there should be a few cycles with the resources and how to properly prepare and transform them, or to look for data enrichment, ways to bring in other resources that fit the objectives we want to achieve. So that's on the low end of the range. If you take more of the factory route, you're looking to grow more of an organizational practice, that can be up to 6 months, and that's where we mentor organizations to stand up that practice. And that's once we've done that more comprehensive assessment, we develop comprehensive plans, then we have the client build it with our oversight and step through each phase methodically and allow them to build out with our oversight, and that's where you can go up to 6 months. So that's where I'd say the range is, and that's to clarify more of the consultant's typical answer of it depends. That's my view. Scott, what would you say about industry standard time for operationalizing a developed model?
Okay, first of all, can you hear me? I put myself on mute.
Yeah, I do. And you know what? I answered the question as though there weren't a developed model at hand. I answered it as though we're starting from scratch. But Ibro asks, what about the time to operationalize a developed model? And I know there's a ton of it depends, but what can you shed light on as far as a developed model and putting it into action?
Well, I'd like to pick up where you what you were talking about. In the big picture, yes, you're right. I agree that it's about 6 weeks from start to completion, including all the steps that need to be taken in the 6-step process. There are a few specialized kind of things like prospect modeling where you can build a model and have it operationalized in a couple of weeks, but those are really specific, specialized applications. I agree with you that if you have a vendor come to you and says we can build one in 2 weeks, they're either not telling you the truth or they're overlooking the first 3 or 4 steps of the development cycle altogether. In terms of operationalizing a model, really that's part of the process. When you get to the last stages of the 6-step process, you're already, a part of that output is to have a model ready for to operationalize. The variables that you have to consider in that situation is where is the model going to live. In some environments, the modelers and the modeling lives in the same environment. In other situations, you may have a modeling team that develops modeling in an environment such as R or SAS or SPSS, and then it has to be put into operations in a, say, a SQL Server environment or an Oracle environment. That takes just a little bit longer. The steps that you need to take from a high level are basically giving the instructions to IT to put together the model, giving them some scored data so that they can check the results. But most importantly, what is often overlooked when you operationalize a model is what happens after it's put into place. One of the places that a lot of implementations fail upon is the ongoing tracking of the scoring and the success of the model. So that takes a little bit of time too. You need to put together tracking systems. Again, if that lives in IT separate from you, that can take a little bit longer, but I would say no more than a week to 2 to operationalize a model.
Sure. Well, and I even argue that when it comes to operationalizing, a lot of that work should be done even before the model is developed. We should be asking a lot of the questions upstream to understand how that model is going to be purposed, and that comes from the assessment, that comes from the plan, and that way a lot of things of how it's going to be operationalized, how it's going to be measured, how those results are going to be translated, how it's going to give residual benefit, those are known even before we go in to develop the model. And there are often times where we can raise some issues that bring up what I call the Jack Nicholson effect. Can you handle the truth? Can you handle some of the results that the model will give? And can we get past the so what test? When the results come out, does leadership care? Is it organizationally, is it pertinent? Got to find those out before wasting the time to go through the technical aspects of model development. And when those are done upstream, then the operationalizing becomes more of a mechanical effort to fulfill the plan that's done before the model's developed. So I'd argue that there's probably more effort on operationalizing before the model's built than after. And one other consideration I put to this, and you'll see this on the modeling agency's website if you go to any of the consulting services pages, is that we specify those services in a view of, are we looking at developing at the model level, a practitioner who's really focused specifically on model development. Maybe somebody else is responsible for the application of the model. So there's some services that we have that are focused really tactically and at the model level, model building level. And the next stage is the process level. Maybe it's within a department, a specific modeling objective, but we want to use that model or refresh it or replace it on occasion. That's where we build out a process, a repeatable process that that will maintenance over time. And then the third level is the practice level. And that's where we're looking more at the enterprise level, maybe an analytics department that serves clients across the enterprise. And when that can be developed, then they can respond much more efficiently when there's a practice involved to respond to the organization with models that are not only produced more efficiently, but they're also targeted to the organization's interest or the organization's interests. So that's 3 different ways that we look at modeling. So we better get on to the next question. Elaine asks, do you offer technical consulting on implementation of predictive modeling for machine data, such as telematics or telematics data from a vehicle. Well, the technical consulting, I probably touched on that a little bit earlier. And as far as the vertical, we play across verticals. There's, our senior consultants really have played across all industries. Some specialize more in certain ones than others. We have, I'd say 70% of our bench is more focused on human behavioral modeling, about 30% around physical systems. And the most important thing to keep in mind when it comes to a certain vertical is that we understand how to work with the various players in your organization that are required for an analytic project. And part of that is understanding when to bring the domain expert in, and not to have the domain expert necessarily be the model developer, because they can bring in some bias, they can bring in some preconceived notions which affect how the data is prepared, what's included, handling outliers, things of that nature. We need to interview the subject matter expert. But that's when we see the best results, when you have a modeling expert who understands when to solicit the contributions of the subject matter expert, usually at the tails of the project, at the beginning and at the end, to gain context at the beginning and then understand how to translate the results. And so that plays across industries, and yes, we've really applied this to all sorts of modeling engagements. Whether it is control-related or marketing or bioinformatics and the like. Scott, anything you want to add as far as, I responded to the technical consulting side, but as far as vertical market experience and approaching projects, that would you agree that when you take the veneer off, the application veneer, it's pretty thin, and that's why I think we can have many people from different backgrounds come into our training courses and track pretty well.
Yeah, I'd echo that. Really what it is it's a theme and variations. You have to master the core modeling concepts, and then everything else is a slight variation. To illustrate it, if you're working with a retailer, even though you're in the retail business, one retailer will vary their business rules, their environment, all the affecting exogenous kinds of variables are going to be a little bit different from one retailer to the next. But as long as you've mastered the core modeling concepts, then it's exactly as you said. You seek the expertise of the subject matter experts at the right time. But modeling is modeling is modeling, and data is data is data. Once you master those core modeling concepts, then you're pretty well equipped to walk into just about any kind of environment.
Great points. Thanks very much, Scott. And I think we can make this the last question. We're up on the end of the 90 minutes, and kudos to those of you who endured the full hour and a half. I know that's a lot to do for a webinar, especially with how busy everybody is in their own practice. Bruce asks about the application of predictive data practices as it applies to workforce planning. This is where I'm personally a bit weak. I do hear a lot of industry buzz lately. Not sure where it's coming from. I do know the predictive analytics world has created a track around it. I don't think that's necessarily where it initiated. I know there's one firm that focuses exclusively on workforce planning and analytics. But at the same time, I haven't heard a lot of active applications. Those who are coming through our training courses, I don't hear much of it, and my view may be outdated that HR departments have been kind of underfunded over history, and I'm not sure that they've had the resources really to do a deeper sense of analytics. And by resources, I don't just mean funding, but I would think that the data resources required are somewhat challenging to collect to the extent that may provide benefit in for workforce analytics, for acquiring talent that performs like your best talent, and in ways in which to retain. And I think those are tricky things. That's I think a tricky problem to design and set up. Once that's established, then like you say, Scott, then it becomes another analytic problem. But assessing whether there's enough resource, financial, whether there's certainly interest. That's one place where workforce analytics is not lacking. because I think organizations understand the expense of losing great talent and acquiring the wrong talent. But what's your view, whether it's directly or indirectly, Scott, on workforce analytics and the data resources and even financial resources around it? What have you heard or seen?
Well, this is one situation where I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth. On one hand, you're right. It is an emerging field. It's getting a lot of attention in the press, and there's some early successes coming out of the industry. On the other hand, it's really not new at all. A lot of what's happening in terms of predictive analytics, overlaps with the field called operations research. And I can tell you that when it comes in terms of, with respect to predicting, it really depends upon what your objective is. Once you understand what the objective is, then you can prescribe the appropriate treatment. To illustrate, in the past, as long as 20 or 30 years ago, I've written scheduling systems that schedules telemarketers or call centers based upon anticipated or forecasted call volumes. You have situations where you're talking about labor standards. If you're going to get into the construction and the hospitality business, how do you staff people ahead of time based upon the characteristics of the of what you're building? There's a long history in terms of econometrics when it comes to staffing. What's the future going to look like for a university? How do we need to plan for the future in terms of staffing and emerging types of courses? Who's going to graduate? Who's not going to graduate? So both things are true. This is a situation. On one hand, when it comes to associating the term of predictive analytics with the industry, that's kind of a new thing. At the same time, there's a long history of things that have been done in the industry, and again, it kind of overlaps with the, from that perspective, it kind of overlaps with the field we call operations research.
Great point. That was educational for me. Thanks very much, Scott. That was a great response. And at 32 minutes past the hour, we'd better draw this event to a close. And I've got to say, it was a very attentive crowd for the polling, but very timid when it came to the questions in the Q&A. But it gave us just enough to get to the bottom of the hour, or the bottom of the half hour anyway. So I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today, again, for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Tony for your great segments, and of course, Scott, for your terrific Q&A contribution. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will be hopefully useful to you, and from there, we'll hope you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. So make sure to act quickly to secure one of the few remaining spaces at the 25% discount rate for the upcoming Washington, D.C. production. If that timing or location doesn't work for you, keep the Toronto event in mind for August. And don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor like Scott and Tony, you may be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Scott, and Tony, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.